It perhaps would be best if you came over here, even though I lined you up there. We don't have a microphone, so I invite you to either speak very loudly or to come over here to the microphone.
Thanks, Susan, and thank you to ISARC for coming back year after year and for making this a focus. So important. And thank you to Senator Eggleton for this very extensive display here. A lot of it, of course, is probably not news to us, but some of it was, and I was certainly educated by it. It's good. You should know that Campaign 2000 is in the House today as well, presenting their report. In fact, simultaneously with this. And one of the things they're reporting is that in Ontario, 1 in 5 children under 6 live in poverty, and 1 in 6 under 18 live in poverty here. Nothing's getting better. So I want to say that straight up. The other thing you should know is that policy makes a difference, and I think that's why Art is here, why we're all here. Policy makes a difference. It makes a dramatic difference. And there are pockets of our world that, although not utopian, do it better than we do here. So you've heard me, they often call me, Miss Sweden, because I talk about Scandinavia so much. But here, let's just look at the difference. In Sweden, when we were there on a parliamentary trip not too long ago, free post-secondary education, free child care, 85% unionization rate, 100,000 new units of housing a year for 10 years, with a population much less than Ontario of around 9 million. Again, minimum wage not an issue because of the 85% unionization rate. McDonald's workers were unionized and made considerably more than our McDonald's workers here. So when you, and of course, pharmacare, etc. When you have policies like that, guess what? You don't have poverty like we have here. It's that direct. There are many things we can do provincially that don't take a guaranteed annual income. So let me say that first and foremost, and they're small things. Listen, I'm a fan, and we in the New Democratic Party are fans of the guaranteed annual income, but here's the catch. My father was part of this. He was part of this demand for a guaranteed annual income in the early 60s. Senator Eggleton's talked about, pilot projects from the 70s. While we're waiting for governments to get a guaranteed annual income that people can live on, here's some policies we can do tomorrow that will make a dramatic difference tomorrow. Things like employment standards. We often look at precarious employment, which is on the rise. 50% of Ontarians now work in precarious jobs. There's a simple response to that. Not only make unionization much, much easier, like they do in Scandinavian countries, that's card check, certification, sectoral organizing, etc., so that everyone has a union. Have a living wage, the $15 per hour campaign. We need to adopt that. We could do it tomorrow. It doesn't cost a tax dime. And that would take about 1 million people out of poverty, by the way. I was part of the original $10 minimum wage campaign, and that took 1 million people up, about a 26% in their income. Real rent control, not just vacancy decontrol, which we have, so that renters can count on a place to live. Real rent control makes a huge difference. Real affordable childcare, like they have in Quebec, makes a huge difference to women who, after all, are right up there in the poverty statistics, especially single-headed families. Dental care, federally pharmacare. Free post-secondary education, let's talk about that. Government's made steps towards this, but more steps are needed along that line. And very simple employment standards changes, like for example, if it costs an employer the same hourly rate for a part-time contract employee and the same benefits as it did for a full-time employee, there wouldn't be so many precarious jobs. It's that simple. These are simple. 10 years ago when I was first elected, I worked with Workers' Action. We brought in an employment standards revision bill. 10 years ago, if we'd adopted that bill, we would have much less poverty in Ontario today. Because let's face it, child care poverty is adult poverty. That's what it reflects. Particularly women's poverty. That's what it reflects as well. Other changes, and the Senator pointed to these, are dramatic in terms of reducing the disparity between wealth and poverty. The wealthiest now pay 40% less taxes over the last 50 years than they did 50 years ago. 40% less. Our banks, some of them paid 2% taxes, corporate taxes. This is because of offshore, moving their profits offshore, etc. So again, he's so correct in talking about we need dramatic tax overhauls. Yes, it used to be 29%. Yes, it's now 15% or less. Corporate taxes less in Ontario. This is not something to be proud about. This is causing poverty. There's a direct line between it. And I'll just conclude by saying I remember a time in my lifetime, I grew up in Toronto where on one salary you could own a house downtown, have a car in the driveway. If you were middle class, and by the way, there was such a thing back then, you could have a cottage, many of my friends' parents did, on one salary. Now look at the reality of young people in the city. On two salaries, you're lucky if you can scrape together enough money for a down payment for a condo. No way for a house for most young people. You'll probably never own a car, and only the incredibly wealthy can own a cottage. That's in one generation. That's the dramatic difference. And I said I was going to end there, but I'll end with one more kudo, and that is to the action plan. Yes, everything he said, do it. You all represent, especially clergy here, and rabbis, anybody who's in a worshiping congregation, represent hundreds of voters. Use that power. Speak to your political representatives. Demand what you need. And the perfect example of that, and doing that well, sits in this room, and that's Archbishop Colin Johnston, right over there. And I pulled him up as an example because years ago, he came to every caucus in this place, conservative, New Democrat, liberal, and he said, we want to put poverty on the agenda of the next election. He asked, how do we do that, specifically housing? How do we do that? One of my suggestions was have all candidates meetings in your churches on the issue of poverty and housing. And they did. The Anglican Church did that. And guess what? Politicians turned up, and so did everybody else. It was had major impact, I believe. If all denominations and all faiths did something like that, it's not only good for your faiths and your denominations, but it's also good to combat poverty. Hold your politicians' feet to the fire, demand answers. You represent power to them. You represent voters. You have power. Use it. Thank you.
For inviting me today to speak, and thank you, Ms. Senator Eglinton. It was a wonderful overview of defining what the problems are and giving us many ways to move forward. I did want to mention one thing. He mentions religious institutions building affordable housing on their property, and I work with the Sisters of Providence in Kingston. They are creating what they call Providence Village as their legacy to leave to our city. Many of them are getting very elderly. The average age is about 78 now, and no one is really joining the order, so they want to leave something significant behind. So they're creating what they're calling Providence Village, and part of that will be affordable housing on their property. So I just wanted to mention that. Senator Eglinton also mentioned that religious institutions can employ people, and I have to say the Sisters of Providence have hired 3 community activists to work in their office, their Justice and Peace office. I've been there 10 years. My director's been there 12, and another woman has been there for 8 years. So there have been 3 of us working, for a long time on community advocacy and anti-poverty initiatives in Kingston. I had to really think about what I might possibly contribute to the conversation today in the company of Senator Eglinton and this panel of experts and longtime activists here. I don't like to have a lot to say in terms of cutting-edge policy developments and research. But I can tell you, if there's time, a little bit about the basic income group that I belong to in Kingston. We were formed in November 3 years ago, and we have been working steadily towards implementing a basic income, encouraging people to implement a basic income since then. But I thought what I'd talk about first is my personal experience, which is perhaps not represented on the panel here, of falling into poverty and then trying to climb out of poverty again. Senator Eggleton's told us about 5 transformative ways to combat poverty, and one of them is basic income. And while in my work and in my life I have advocated for all different kinds of changes, I believe in raising social assistance rates now. I advocate for a higher minimum wage. I work for trying to bring a living wage to Kingston, and I'm in a basic income group. All of those different ways don't have any contradictions. They can all work together to do all kinds of benefit. But my favorite at the moment is a basic income for some reasons. So I just want to talk a little bit about why that's the case for me and what a difference a basic income would have made in my life when I did fall into poverty. So I ended up in Kingston at Queen's University. I left Saskatchewan, which is my home province, and I started a PhD program there. After a couple of years, I left for a number of reasons, mainly because I was a single parent. I had 3 children, and it was very, very difficult for me to keep all of those, balls in the air, juggling all of those. But I left university with a master's degree in English, and I already had a degree in journalism as well. So I thought, okay, I have a good education. I should be able to find a job. I'll be okay. I took whatever short-term contract and part-time jobs I could find. And although I spent nearly every day for months at the Career Center on campus, I didn't even get an interview, much less a full-time job. So coming out of the province, I didn't have a network of people in Kingston that I could draw on in order to find a job. You really need to know people. They need to have some knowledge of you and have some trust in you to suggest that you could do a job, and I just didn't have that network. So I just didn't have those connections to find decent employment. But I continued to search for work, and I took whatever I could find, and I also volunteered a lot. I was a lunchtime and playground supervisor at my kids' school. I served on the board of directors of the daycare my kids attended. I was on the parent-teacher council, and I hooked up with an anti-poverty group in Kingston where I volunteered for the next 10 years. I also did volunteer work for a local publishing company, and I wrote articles for local newspapers and even magazines, national magazines. However, none of this was lucrative. As a single parent of 3 kids, it was clear that I couldn't hope by freelancing and piecing together part-time, low-paid work to bring in enough money to both pay the rent and put food on the table. So after about a year, I felt that all my options were exhausted in terms of employment, and I made the unpleasant decision to apply for welfare. In the early 1990s, the NDP government was still in power in Ontario, and I qualified for a family benefits allowance, which was a bit more money than general welfare was. I don't remember anymore how much money they gave me. However, it still wasn't enough. Whatever it wasn't enough. And then in 1992, the federal government ended family allowance and the child tax benefit. Senator Eggleton mentioned the Canada Child Benefit, which is a substantial amount of money today. At that time, the maximum was $85 a month per child. I think today it's in the range of $500 to $600 a month per child. But anyway, I got to keep that additional $250 until 1995. That is when Premier Mike Harris came to power in Ontario. The first thing he did was cut social assistance rates by 21.6%, and then he also clawed back the child tax benefit from parents receiving welfare. And also under Harris, welfare rules were at their most oppressive, punitive, and draconian, and no politician since has matched them in their mean-spiritedness and severity. So I continued to work as much as I could, and for 8 years I had 40-hour-a-week employment in retail. However, that was still not enough for me to earn to exit the welfare system. So the province took back every dollar of my earnings and all of my child support, and they gave me a small top up in exchange to bring me up to welfare levels. The result was that I and my family remained firmly trapped in the welfare systems. So the consequences were that I lost nearly a decade of my life. I was between 40 and 50 years old roughly, and that's a time when most working Canadians are at their most productive and are laying stores for the future. Worse, my children lost out in so many ways. While I know about good nutrition, I couldn't afford to feed them decent food when they were growing. They're all bright and creative children, but they couldn't take advantage of opportunities that came their way, and they did get opportunities that came their way, but even those that were ostensibly free required some funds in order for them to take advantage of them. My eldest son was more established by virtue of being older and having experienced more prosperous years, but my two youngest sons were really affected by those years, and they seem to have internalized the uncertainty which Guy Standing, who is co-founder of the Basic Income Earth Network, says characterizes our current age. Standing has popularized the term the precariat in his many books on the subject, and in one names the precariat's dilemma as the scourge of uncertainty. While all my kids have post-secondary educations and they all are now working and have jobs, they are still part of an emerging class of people who are experiencing multiple forms of insecurity and can perceive little prospect of escape. My youngest is now back at university doing a master's degree. That might make them more employable, but it has resulted in massive personal debt. Not being financially secure for a decade meant that when I finally landed a living wage job, I had no savings or extras with which to help my kids when they went off to college and university. So the result is that all of them ended up in debt. And now that I'm approaching retirement, I wonder how I'm going to live once I'm not working. Senator Edelton mentioned the GIS, and yes, that's going to help. But I lost 10 years of my life when I could have been making money and putting money away. And that was a cost to me and my family, but it's also a cost to all of society. I had skills, I had an education. I could have been doing something much more productive. But anyway, so I don't own anything. I don't own a car, I don't own a home, I own nothing of value whatsoever. During the 10 years of living wage employment that I've been doing for the Sisters of Providence, I have a small pension and I have done my best to save. I put extra, I put 12% of my earnings into my pension, whereas most people put 4%. I put money into our RSPs. However, all of it together, even with the old age security and the guaranteed income supplement, is not going to allow me to have an apartment when I retire. I make a decent salary, but even so, once I retire, I'm not going to have enough to pay my bills and keep an apartment. Sherry DeNovo mentioned about social policies having consequences and making a difference, and I understand that from the inside out in the experiences I've had. So I have a poster on my office that I made out of a photo and an article on basic income. It asks in bold capital letters, painted in yellow on a blue streetscape, what would you do if your income were taken care of? So I often look at that poster, and it harkens me back to those days when I couldn't do any more than put one step in front of the other and try to figure out how me and my kids were going to make it through another day. Having an income floor that prevented us from ending up in deep poverty would have made an immeasurable difference. Being able to keep the dollars I earned working would have put us so much farther ahead. Having the benefit of ensured that we could meet our basic needs and live with dignity, regardless of my work status. I did work most of the time. I was on assistance, and you did get some, extra dollars if you did. It still, there were reasons why it would have been good for me to be at home sometimes as well, because I had 3 kids at home as a single parent. Knowing there were no judgments about my being deserving or not, and that there were no needs tests, conditions, or requirements would have just made such a difference. Knowing that a basic income is not a privilege but a right, would have been transformative in my life, and it would be transformative in so many other people's lives. So that's why I'm very much in support of a basic income, and why I've joined with other activists in Kingston to encourage people to take that up. So.
Tara, thank you so much for sharing that personal story with us. We'll call on Taylor now.
Good morning. Morning. I have to lean in order for you to hear me. Is that a good plan? Okay, good. And I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about today. There's a couple of sort of taglines that I thought about. The first is poverty just ended already. When I first started doing this work, it actually hasn't been that long, probably about 7 years. I remember my first internship when I first got involved with MyServe was in 2011. And the person who interviewed me said, Kaylee, this kind of work means that we're losing constantly, and I want to know how you're going to be able to handle putting forward these amazing ideas that could make a huge difference in someone's life, and then only getting half of what you suggested, only getting a quarter. And I remember saying to, you might know Greg Through-Pagetti, this is a conversation we had. I remember saying to him, like, oh, you don't need to worry. I know how to celebrate like small wins. You just go home and have a glass of champagne or something like that. And over the past 2 months, I've started thinking, like, oh man, I'm sick of drinking small glasses of champagne. Have the whole bottle. So, like, there are things that we can do. We have the evidence. We heard about the evidence. We heard from Jerry the policies that we can put forward right now that could make a difference for people. So the first tagline would be poverty just ended. But that wouldn't be enough. A second tagline would be stability, just build it. There are many people in Ontario who are struggling who technically don't live in poverty. People who have lost their jobs in a manufacturing facility or something similar, and they're going back for retraining and finding that a job isn't available today. They might have savings that they're living off of and other things, so technically not living in poverty, but that stability is not there. And how people are experiencing work and experiencing the economy in general today has changed pretty dramatically. Some things that I just want to reiterate. Median income has stagnated. In fact, in 2011, almost 50% of all workers in Ontario earn less than $30,000 a year. So $30,000 is not the poverty line. It's quite a bit above the poverty line if you're a single person. But that doesn't mean that you have access to affordable housing. It doesn't mean that transportation is all of a sudden affordable. It doesn't mean that healthy food is affordable. Temporary work, involuntary part-time work, all of those, bargaining power has decreased while instability in work has increased. The number of hours families work for pay has increased, while the number of hours you work at home has probably stayed about the same. Tuition is increasing. All of these things are true. At the same time, social assistance has been improved. So people are experiencing instability and poverty in the labor market, even though they're working hard, and more instability and more or a deeper level of poverty in the social assistance system. Social assistance income, or the gap between the poverty line and social assistance income, has not changed since 2003. So we heard this morning that, what was the line? The mean-spiritedness of the Mike Harris years has not been matched. But since then, things haven't gotten better. So maybe nobody's made it worse, but we haven't seen the poverty gap close. That's also a problem. I guess what I want to do in a minute is put forward a vision for what I think is possible. A lot of what we've done, austerity, lowering wages, lowering stability in the labor market, all of that has sort of been for a vision of a stronger economy. We need to do these things so that the economy will grow, and if the economy grows, everyone will benefit. So picture in your mind what a strong economy looks like to you. You might think of someone like a big, strong sort of weightlifter who's sort of angry and has veins popping out everywhere. That's one vision. The vision that I have for a strong, high-functioning economy is actually someone more like a yoga master who is able to hold a number of different poses. You can picture, I do yoga 3 times a week and can't do any pose that I would like to show you. But doing any one of the poses that you're picturing actually takes a whole bunch of tiny little muscles. It's not just a basic income, though basic income is necessary for a strong economy that everyone benefits from. It's not just a higher minimum wage, though a $15 minimum wage is necessary so that we have a strong economy for everyone. It's not just a really, really powerful and strong education system that is free, though that is necessary for everyone to benefit from our strong and growing economy. The list goes on and on. Childcare, housing, a less pathetic, more enlightened social assistance system, possibly the basic income. And I guess what I want to reiterate this morning is that there isn't one silver bullet. In fact, we need all of these policies working together. We heard this morning that we can't just fight for one. In fact, we need to work together. Whatever your policy is that you've decided is the one that you want to fight for, that doesn't mean that the person who's fighting for something different is your enemy or your competition. In fact, we need to be talking about how we can build a stronger economy that functions for everyone. Thank you.
You'll have to excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, so if my voice goes, I'll try to stay safe. Now, I'm not a policy expert, and as you learned, I'm new to Canada, and I'm learning about the issues here. I'm trying to be a policy expert for a rabbi. So, I am a rabbi. I don't know if I'm an expert in that either. But so, as a non-policy expert who is a rabbi, I want to give a religious commentary. And as the Archbishop said at the beginning, I can only speak from my tradition. Last week, Jews all over the world in their synagogues studied a portion of the Bible, and that portion included the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, when I mention Sodom and Gomorrah, most people in the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, most people think of something that we might have learned in popular culture. But the sages of Judaism, our ancient rabbis, say that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah is actually that the cities did not welcome outsiders and that they did not support the poor. According to our sages, the people of Sodom had every bad quality, but their judgment was sealed on this sin because they did not strengthen the hand of the poor and the downtrodden, and they were consistent in this sin more than others. That is a statement from our rabbis. I want to continue other things that they said. The rabbis teach the men of Sodom said, "Since our land produces food, silver, gold, precious stones, and pearls, we have no need for outsiders. We don't need to give it to anybody else. We live in a country that is very prosperous, that produces food, gold, silver, precious stones." And I want to quote the senator, or paraphrase the senator. Actually, we can't afford poverty. We have all this wealth, but we can't afford poverty. The people of Sodom felt that they couldn't afford to give all the stuff they had to others. It says in the Bible that God heard the cry of the people of Sodom, and the rabbis said, well, what was that cry? And that cry, they say, was actually a young woman who was trying to change the society, and she was crying out. But the people of the town, our sages said, everyone who strengthens the hand of the poor and the needy and the stranger with a loaf of bread shall be burnt by fire. the paradigmatic society, the paradigmatic sin of a society, my tradition says, is not supporting the poor. Now, the Bible talks a lot about supporting the poor, but it doesn't actually talk about charity a lot. Charity is when you give to you as an individual give to a needy person. It does talk about that, but it usually talks about how society supports the poor. And it doesn't talk about it as charity, it talks about it as obligation. It's a society's obligation to support the poor through things like the Bible talks about what's called peah. Every farmer has to leave the corners of their field for people to take the food. But it's not the farmer giving them the food, it's the food, it's the poor people's food. That is their food, it's not the farmer's. The farmer doesn't own it. It talks about maaser, which is in English tithing. Tithing is not people giving, it's tax. It's society taking and giving to those who need it. As the senator said, tax is not a bad word. And I think our religious tradition knows that. 19th century Rabbi Simcha Zitzel Ziv, who lived in Lithuania, said, talking about how to be a good person, he says, first we must examine the consequences of deeds and thoughts both, to be sure that they are politically constructive. For it is the political structure that sustains the world and conversely can shatter it. Politically constructive. Our personal deeds need to be involved in the structure of society. Now, the rabbi lived basically in a autonomous Jewish society within the greater society, but today we live in a multicultural society where we are all responsible for everybody. Me as a Jew, people as Christians, people as Muslims, we're all in this together. And that is what political is. That to be a good person, you must be involved in political society because, or if you're not, as the rabbi says, things can shatter. Now back to the Bible. It says in Deuteronomy, there shall be no needy among you, since the eternal your God will bless you in the land that the eternal your God is giving you as a hereditary portion. There shall be no needy among you. But then a few verses later, that the senator again quoted, it says, for there will never cease to be needy ones in your land, which is why I command you, open your hand to the poor and needy kin in your land. So here we do, within a few verses, we have a contradiction. There will be no needy, and there will never cease to be needy.